The air was thick with steam, the kind that clung to the skin and blurred the edges of reality. I could hear the hum of the water behind the thin, glass door. My hand trembled slightly on the frame. I knew he was inside. I knew I shouldn't be there. But I didn't move. Neither did he. He turned slowly, startled at first, towel slung carelessly over his shoulder, his hair damp and sticking to his forehead. His eyes widened when he saw me standing there. Not in fear. Not in shame. In something I couldn't name without crossing a line I hadn't meant to approach. Not yet. Did you mean to? His voice was low, unsure. I didn't think, I stopped myself. I had thought. I just didn't expect to find him like that. So bare. So unaware. So close. He stepped forward. I should have turned and left. I should have closed the door. I didn't. The steam swirled around us. My breath caught. He leaned in. And just before anything happened, before anything could happen, the front door slammed. My husband was home. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question. Do you believe temptation only finds us when something inside us is already broken? The heat that summer was suffocating, the kind that made you want to peel off your skin and start over. I remember standing in our kitchen, staring at the calendar, a red circle marking my nephew's arrival like a quiet warning. My husband had suggested he stay with us during his internship. He'll help around the house, he said. It'll be good to have young energy here. Young energy. That's what he called it. We hadn't touched in weeks. Maybe months. The routines had replaced romance, and every conversation was some version of "Did you pay the bill?" or "We're out of milk." I didn't argue. I nodded. I cooked. I watered the garden. I smiled when needed. I wasn't unhappy. But I wasn't anything. He arrived 2 hours earlier than expected. I heard the gate creak, the same way it had for years, and looked out the window to see him dragging his suitcase up the path. Taller than I remembered. Broader. His eyes scanned the house like he was looking for something familiar, something remembered. When they landed on me, they lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Still the same, he said, stepping inside, wiping sweat from his brow. Even smells the same. Like rosemary and old wood. I laughed too hard at that. I don't know why. My husband gave him the tour, dropped his bags in the guest room, and announced he'd be gone the next morning for 2 nights, work trip to Lyon, meetings, hotel breakfast, usual excuses. At dinner, we sat around the table with a bottle of Rioja and grilled vegetables. They talked mostly about university, Spain's miserable trains, politics. I watched the way he used his hands when he spoke, how he leaned forward, how his laugh seemed fuller now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way he'd looked at me when I opened the door. Not inappropriately. Just, attentively. Like I was a person, not just someone's wife. The next morning, I made breakfast. My husband left before sunrise. By the time I walked back from the market, he was shirtless, painting the back wall of the garden shed. Music played from his phone. His skin shimmered with sweat. "You should wear sunscreen," I said. He turned. "You sound like my mother." I went inside before he saw me smile. Later that day, I was cleaning the upstairs bathroom. The lock on the door had been broken since before Christmas, and I reminded myself for the 100th time to fix it. I ran the water, soaked a sponge, and crouched to scrub the base of the tub. The air grew heavy with humidity. I heard the floor creak behind me. He stepped in. Eyes wide. A moment of sheer confusion, then horror. I didn't, I thought it was empty. I stood up too fast, bumping my elbow. I should have locked it. Sorry. We both froze. The door was still ajar. He didn't step back. I'll go, he said finally, backing out, his face flushed. That night, we avoided each other. At dinner, we talked about nothing. I overcooked the rice. He complimented it anyway. I caught him glancing at me while he drank water. I looked away each time. The next day, I suggested we repaint the hallway. Something useful. Something safe. We went to the hardware store, walked through the aisles debating colors. I chose a muted olive. He teased me for being predictable. It matches the couch, I said. Everything matches the couch, he replied. In the car ride home, the silence between us was different. Comfortable but sharp around the edges. Every word felt like it meant more than it should. We spent the afternoon painting. He worked quietly, focused. I found myself watching him more than the wall. At one point, his phone rang. He stepped outside to answer. I stayed behind, hands dripping with paint, brush hovering mid-air. I wasn't thinking about the walls anymore. That night, I watered the garden alone. The crickets were loud. The breeze warm. I heard footsteps behind me, but didn't turn. You missed a patch by the tomatoes, he said. I'll get it tomorrow. Or I will. We stood there in silence. The stars bright above. Something unspoken forming between us. I went inside. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and tried not to think about anything. He walked in, still groggy, shirt sticking to his skin. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from me. You okay? He asked. I nodded. We didn't speak again for hours. That evening, I suggested we watch a movie. Something old. We settled on a Spanish comedy from the 80s. He brought a blanket. We didn't sit too close. But not far either. When the credits rolled, he didn't move. Neither did I. I should go to bed, I said finally. He didn't respond. Just looked at me. Then we heard it. The sound of keys. The front door opening. My husband's voice. Hello? I jumped up. He walked in, suitcase in hand, smiling like nothing had happened. Miss me? I nodded, forcing the muscles in my face to perform. He kissed my cheek. I felt nothing. He turned to my nephew. Hope she didn't bore you to death. My nephew smiled politely. Not at all. I met his eyes for just a second. And in that second, I knew everything had already changed. He walked in with the kind of ease that only someone oblivious could carry. My husband tossed his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the one we bought on our honeymoon in Valencia. He rubbed the back of his neck like he always did after a drive, placed his bag down, and stretched his arms. I smiled like nothing inside me was unraveling. He unpacked in the bedroom while I stood in the kitchen, hands motionless above a chopping board, the knife still waiting to slice a tomato. The house felt smaller suddenly. Every corner seemed tighter, like the walls had overheard too much and now refused to breathe. They spoke briefly. Polite. Detached. He asked my nephew about the internship, some joke about him learning more from painting our walls than any office in Madrid could teach. My nephew laughed. I didn't. I couldn't tell if the laugh was nervous or genuine. I didn't care. I didn't want to care. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay beside my husband, stiff as wood, his breath warm and slow. He reached for me once in the dark, his hand brushing my waist. I held my breath until he rolled away. Morning came like a slap. I filled the house with movement. Dishes clattering. Washing machine humming. Broom scraping across the hallway tiles. Anything to drown the silence. My husband announced he'd be gone again that evening, another overnight trip. "This month's brutal," he said, tucking a folder into his bag. "Too many clients, not enough hours." I nodded. By midday, it was just the two of us again. He was in the guest room fixing the shelves he'd offered to help with weeks ago. I hovered near the doorway, pretending to tidy a stack of old magazines. "You don't have to keep pretending like nothing happened," he said, not looking at me. I froze. He turned, screwdriver still in hand. "It wasn't nothing," he added. I didn't answer. I walked away. Later that afternoon, we went to the store. A practical errand. Paint, light bulbs, cleaning gloves. In the aisle of do-it-yourself, I watched him drag his fingers along the sample cards. He paused on a deep green and turned to me. "This one's alive," he said. "It's too dark," I replied. He smirked, placed it in the basket anyway. As we left, the automatic doors opened with a gust of hot air, the parking lot buzzing with cicadas and slow-moving shoppers. He pushed the cart and I walked beside him, our arms occasionally brushing. My chest tightened with every accidental touch. Back home, we spent an hour silently taping the edges of the wall in the hallway. The air was heavy with humidity, thick with what we weren't saying. I opened the windows, but it didn't help. The heat wasn't coming from outside. "I used to think you were cold," he said suddenly. I paused mid-tape. "Excuse me?" "Back when I was a teenager. You always seemed untouchable." "And now?" He looked directly at me. "Now you seem real." I didn't know what to say to that. He returned to painting, moving with calm precision. I tried to focus on the corners, on doing something useful. But my hands were shaking. That evening, I put on music. Something light, nostalgic. I told myself it would loosen the air, distract us from ourselves. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, unsure. I handed him a glass of water. Then I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was the fact that I suddenly remembered how to laugh. He laughed too. And then he held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "Don't pretend you don't remember how." I hesitated. Then stepped toward him. It wasn't dancing. Not really. Just slow shuffling across tiles, our feet occasionally bumping, our shoulders brushing. He smelled like citrus and something unfamiliar. Something younger. Lighter. The song faded into another. We didn't notice. At some point, I stopped moving. So did he. There was a moment, a stretch of time suspended between breath and decision. He leaned slightly forward. And then we kissed. It lasted 1 second. Maybe less. We stepped back in sync, as if the same fear yanked us at the same time. He looked down. I turned away. "I need air," I whispered. Outside, the cicadas screamed louder than ever. I sat on the stone bench near the olive tree, the one my husband had planted 5 years ago. I stared at the ground. The screen door creaked open behind me. He sat down, not too close. "I'm sorry," he said. "No, you're not," I replied. Silence. He shifted. "Do you regret it?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt stuffed with gravel. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I walked through the house like a ghost, passing the closed doors, the quiet furniture. I found myself in the hallway we'd painted, staring at the green he picked. It was darker than I remembered. I sat down on the floor. Hugged my knees. Stayed there until the morning light changed the color of the walls. By breakfast, my husband was gone again. A note on the counter, back tomorrow. Salamanca overnight. Love you. The words might as well have been written by a stranger. He walked in 5 minutes later, fresh from a shower. He asked if I wanted coffee. I nodded. Neither of us mentioned last night. That afternoon, we watched a movie. Something old and silly. We didn't laugh. Not once. The film played in the background while the silence between us throbbed. When it ended, I turned off the screen. He didn't move. And then, out of nowhere, the front door opened. My husband stepped inside. Surprise, he said, grinning. Meeting got cancelled. He dropped his bag by the stairs, walked toward me. My pulse stuttered. He kissed my cheek, light as always. Then looked at my nephew. I hope she didn't bore you to death. My nephew's smile was practiced. Not at all. I saw it then, the tiniest detail. My husband's eyes flicked down. To the edge of the blanket on the couch. To the 2 coffee mugs still on the table. To the smudge of green paint on my wrist. He didn't say a word. But in that moment, something behind his eyes changed. And I knew he saw it. All of it. He didn't say anything that night. He unpacked his things slowly, methodically, as if buying time or trying to make sense of something without asking questions. I watched him from the kitchen, my hands trembling over the sink. The smudge of green paint on my wrist was still there, mocking me. I scrubbed it off until the skin reddened. He was unusually quiet through dinner. No teasing, no casual remarks, no tired sighs about traffic or emails. Just a kind of stillness that didn't belong to him. A silence that watched me more than it spoke to me. He ate quickly, excused himself, and went to bed early, leaving me alone with a half-cleared table and 1,000 thoughts slamming into each other like waves. The next morning felt stranger. He acted like nothing had happened. Kissed me goodbye like always, muttered something about needing to check in at the office before heading to Salamanca again. I didn't believe him, but I didn't question it. He left, and the air in the house changed instantly. I stood in the doorway long after he drove away. Behind me, I heard footsteps. You think he noticed? He asked. I turned. My nephew leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. He wasn't smiling. I don't know, I said. We didn't speak after that. Not for hours. Around noon, I announced I needed to get out. I didn't ask if he wanted to come, I just grabbed my purse and left. But he followed. No hesitation. No invitation needed. It was hot outside, the type of heat that melts thoughts into one slow blur. I walked quickly, directionless, until I reached the small local bus stop. The next bus to Palencia was in 8 minutes. Let's go, I said. He didn't ask where. The ride was quiet. I stared out the window the entire time, my reflection faint and ghost-like in the glass. He sat beside me, too close for comfort but not close enough to touch. The hum of the engine and the sharp turns along the highway made it easier to avoid looking at him. In Palencia, we walked without aim. The streets were busier than I expected, full of tourists and lazy locals sipping coffee in shaded plazas. We wandered into a narrow street lined with antique stores and dusty bookshops. In one of them, he picked up a small ceramic owl and said it reminded him of the one on our mantel at home. You remember that? I asked. He nodded. I remember everything from that house. We walked into the old cathedral. It was cool inside, the stone walls soaking up centuries of silence. I sat in the back pew and closed my eyes for a moment. He sat beside me, his hands resting on his knees. We didn't speak, but I could feel his thoughts pressing against the air between us. When I opened my eyes, he was looking at the altar. "You ever think you were born into the wrong life?" he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Later, we found a small cafe by the water. We ordered 2 coffees and sat in silence again. I traced the rim of the cup with my finger while he watched people pass by. A group of teenagers threw breadcrumbs to the ducks, a mother yelled at her child for dropping ice cream, a couple held hands and kissed under the shadow of a poplar tree. He turned to me. "This isn't just your life, you know." I looked at him. "What is it then?" He didn't reply. The bus ride home was longer, slower, heavier. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting orange light across the seats. He rested his head back and closed his eyes. I watched the road. When we got home, the house felt unfamiliar. Like something had shifted permanently. He walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water. I took mine and stood by the window, staring at the outline of the olive tree in the backyard. "We can't go back," I said. "I'm not asking to," he replied. Later that night, I opened the back door to let in some air. The heat hadn't broken. It stuck to the walls, to my skin, to every word we hadn't said. I sat on the porch, knees pulled to my chest. He joined me after a while. He didn't say anything. Just sat there beside me, watching the sky. We didn't move. And then we kissed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't slow. It happened like lightning, sharp, fast, and real. When it ended, I didn't look at him. I got up and went inside. Locked myself in the bedroom and paced for an hour. By morning, he was gone. Not out of the house, just out. No note. No breakfast dishes. Just silence. Around noon, I found him sitting at the far edge of the garden, painting. The canvas was small. He didn't hear me approach. I stood behind him for a long time, watching his brush move. The shapes were abstract, messy, not his usual style. Something was wrong. He noticed me eventually and moved to cover the canvas. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing. Just colors." "Show me." He hesitated. Then pulled the canvas back into view. It wasn't colors. It was me. Not a perfect likeness, just a feeling. A shape of me standing at the kitchen sink, light on my face, eyes shadowed. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't romantic. It was real. "Why would you paint that?" I asked. "Because it's what I saw." I backed away. Inside, I started packing. I didn't know what I was packing for: anger, guilt, escape. Just movement. My hands moved on their own. The front door creaked open. I turned, expecting to see him again. But it was my husband. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. His eyes swept the room. The half-packed suitcase. The silence behind me. "Where are you going?" he asked. I opened my mouth. And couldn't speak. His voice cut through the stillness like a blade. I turned and faced him, still gripping the zipper of the half-packed suitcase, my fingers stiff. The question hung between us: where was I going? I didn't know. I hadn't even thought that far. There was no destination, just a need to move, to escape, to erase whatever expression I'd seen in my nephew's eyes that morning, and the silence he left behind. I opened my mouth, but my throat was dry. My husband walked inside slowly, his shoes creaking against the wood floor. He glanced once at the suitcase, once at me, then carried on like he hadn't seen anything at all. He walked to the kitchen, took a bottle of water from the fridge, drank half of it standing up, and then leaned against the counter like someone who wasn't in a hurry to hear the answer. "I thought you weren't back until tomorrow," I finally said. "I took an earlier train." He said nothing else. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches a stranger unpack in their living room. I zipped the suitcase closed, not out of defiance but because it felt too exposed. He said he needed a shower. The moment he disappeared down the hallway, I collapsed onto the bed, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stayed there for what felt like hours, unmoving, breathing shallow. When I finally stepped out, the house was dark except for the yellowish light in the hallway. His suitcase stood untouched by the door. In the morning, he acted like nothing happened. He made coffee, toast, whistled a tune I didn't recognize. He left to run errands and said he'd be back for dinner. I nodded. Words felt useless. By noon, the sun was punishing. The electricity flickered once and then gave up entirely. The fan died. The lights vanished. The house fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. I stood in the kitchen, the fridge humming in protest before falling completely silent too. I went to check the fuse box, already knowing it wasn't the problem. Outside, the heat was heavier than ever. Even the birds seemed too tired to sing. The neighbor's dog lay motionless under the oleander bush, tongue out, eyes closed. The streets were empty. Then I heard footsteps. He was back. My nephew walked in through the back patio, his shirt damp with sweat, his forehead glistening. He looked around and raised an eyebrow. "Power's out?" I nodded. He opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out 2 candles, lit them, and placed them on the table. I didn't know what to say. He sat down, staring at the flame, letting the silence between us build like rising smoke. I poured 2 glasses of cold water. We drank slowly. The power didn't return. The air grew heavier. I opened the windows, hoping for a breeze. Nothing. Just hot, still air thick with the scent of citrus and paint. "We can't stay here," I said. "It's too much." "Where would we go?" he asked. I didn't know. A few minutes later, I stepped into the hallway and caught my reflection in the mirror, my face flushed, hair sticking to my skin, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked like someone waiting for a decision that would never be made for her. He was leaning against the doorframe, watching me. "You should eat something," I said. He didn't move. "I don't want food." I walked past him toward the kitchen, but he followed. I could feel his presence behind me, close but not touching. I leaned against the counter and took a breath, then another. I turned to say something, anything, but the words never came. We stood there, 2 bodies too close for too long. I reached for a glass. And then we spent night together. Morning arrived wrapped in silence. I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming. I shot upright. The room spun. The window was still open, and outside, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. My husband. I bolted from the room. He stood in the hallway with a bag of groceries, looking surprised to see me. He smiled, that same tight-lipped smile that no longer meant anything. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yes." He walked into the kitchen and began unpacking things, tomatoes, eggs, a loaf of bread, olives. He asked where the good knife was. I handed it to him. Our hands touched. His didn't flinch. I turned, and there he was. My nephew, walking down the hallway toward us. His shirt untucked, his eyes dropping instantly when he saw my husband. The knife paused mid-slice. My husband looked up. Just for a second. No one said anything. The moment passed. The day dragged with unbearable weight. The three of us rotated around the house like planets avoiding collision. My husband went to mow the front yard. My nephew disappeared into his room. I scrubbed the bathroom even though it was already clean. By evening, the air had turned electric. A storm was near, I could feel it in my bones. I made dinner like nothing had happened. My husband complimented the food. My nephew nodded along. We chewed in silence. Afterwards, I went to the terrace and stood alone under the heavy sky. The crickets were quiet. Even nature was holding its breath. He joined me after a while. My nephew, not my husband. He didn't speak. Just stood beside me, staring at the horizon. I wanted to tell him it had to stop. That it was wrong. That we were already too far gone. But I couldn't form the words. He turned to me, his eyes full of something too complicated to name. I can't stay here, he said quietly. Then go, I whispered. He looked at me one last time. Then walked inside. I waited on the terrace long after the lights in his room went dark. Sometime after midnight, I returned to the living room. The house was silent. I passed by my husband's study and noticed the door slightly ajar. The light was on. I peeked inside. He was sitting at the desk, staring at his laptop, unmoving. On the screen, I saw an open browser. I moved closer. It was a booking confirmation. A hotel. 2 guests. His name. And mine. But I hadn't booked anything. My heart stopped. And then I saw it, the date. Tomorrow. A city I hadn't mentioned. A hotel I didn't recognize. But the reservation was there. Already paid. Already confirmed. I turned around. He was looking right at me. And smiling. He didn't say anything. Just smiled, like he was enjoying a secret I wasn't in on, even though it had my name printed on the screen in bold letters. The hotel confirmation blinked softly on his laptop, glowing in the low light of the study. I didn't move. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to calculate the timeline of what this could mean. Trying to convince myself it was some kind of misunderstanding. But it wasn't. There was no misunderstanding in the way he looked at me. He closed the lid of the laptop slowly, never taking his eyes off me. Then he stood and walked past me without a word. His footsteps faded down the hall. A second later, the light in our bedroom switched off. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room all night, staring at nothing. The house was still, but not peaceful. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm, too quiet to trust. At some point I made tea and didn't drink it. The cup sat cold by dawn. In the morning, the world spun as if nothing had happened. My husband acted normal, almost cheerful. He made breakfast. Fried eggs, toast, coffee. No questions, no tension. When my nephew walked in, the air changed slightly, only slightly, and then corrected itself again. I'm going out for a few hours, my husband said casually. I'll be back before dinner. No one asked where. He left. I waited 15 minutes before I turned to my nephew. I need to talk. He followed me out into the garden without a word. We stood by the fig tree, away from the windows, where the heat clung to everything like guilt. I told him about the booking. The hotel. The dates. The name. He listened in silence, eyes dark with confusion, or maybe understanding. I didn't book anything, he said. You know I didn't. I nodded. But someone did. In our names. I couldn't tell if it was a trap. Or a test. Or something else entirely. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You think he knows? I don't know what he knows, I said. What do you want to do? I need to find out why. The hours passed in slow, unbearable increments. My husband returned as promised, just before dinner, carrying groceries and a bottle of wine. He handed me the receipt and said we should open it tonight. Something to celebrate, he added, like it was an inside joke. I nodded like I understood. During dinner, he spoke about a new client, about politics, about how the neighbor's fence was sagging again. I nodded and smiled and served the rice without tasting it. After we cleared the dishes, I found the courage to ask about the hotel. He looked up, mid-sip of wine. What hotel? The one in Salamanca, I said. He paused. Just a beat too long. Oh. That, he replied. It was a mistake. I booked it for a client and used our profile by accident. Must have saved the names. He said it smoothly. Casually. But his eyes didn't blink when he lied. I wanted to scream, but I smiled. The next morning, he left for the office early again. The door closed behind him. The lock clicked, soft but certain. I turned to my nephew. Pack a bag. He didn't ask why. We left the house an hour later and drove in silence. Not to the hotel. Not to Salamanca. Just away. We needed distance. We needed time. We needed air. We ended up at a beach town 2 hours west, quiet, sun-bleached, empty of tourists for the season. We checked into a small guest house under my maiden name. No fanfare. Just keys and silence. That afternoon, we walked the coastline. The waves crashed rhythmically, the sky hanging low with the threat of rain. We didn't talk. There was too much to say and no right way to say it. At nightfall, we returned to the room. We spent night together. I woke up before him. The rain had come in the night, and it was still drizzling softly outside. I got dressed and walked to the tiny cafe across the road, ordered 2 coffees, and returned to find him sitting up, looking out the window like he'd aged a decade. He asked what I was thinking. I said I wasn't sure. But it wasn't true. I was thinking of how to return to a life that no longer existed. By noon, we drove back. The air felt heavier the closer we got. My stomach twisted tighter with every kilometer. When we pulled up to the house, it looked the same. But something was off. I unlocked the door slowly. The house was spotless. Too spotless. The cushions were arranged. The floor mopped. The table set for 3. But no one was home. I found a note on the fridge. Hope you had a good trip. I've gone to visit my brother for the weekend. You two seemed like you needed some time alone. There was no signature. Just those words. I stood there, staring at the paper, unable to breathe. Behind me, my nephew stepped back. His hand fell to his side, tense. We didn't speak. That evening, he packed his things. I should go, he said. I didn't argue. He left quietly, a small bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back. I watched from the window until his silhouette disappeared down the road. The house was silent again. That night, my husband didn't call. And I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found the garden gate slightly open. One of the ceramic pots was knocked over, shattered on the stone path. I walked outside barefoot and crouched to gather the pieces. There was something beneath them. A small flash drive. No label. No note. Just there, under the broken shards. Waiting. I didn't touch it at first. I stared at the flash drive in the dirt like it might hiss, or detonate, or vanish if I looked away. The broken terracotta lay in shards around it, some edges sharp enough to draw blood, and I realized I was still barefoot. My heel was bleeding slightly, a small scratch I hadn't noticed in the moment. I picked up the drive slowly and held it like something sacred and dangerous at the same time. There was nothing written on it, no initials, no label, no clue to its origin. But the timing was too precise, the placement too deliberate. Someone had left it for me. I walked back inside, barefoot, the tiny sting of the cut grounding me more than pain ever could. I didn't plug it in. Not yet. I left it on the dining table and stood across from it, staring at it like it might explain itself if given enough time. That afternoon, the city buzzed louder than usual. It was the Feria de San Lorenzo weekend. People from all over Valladolid crowded into the city center for the parades and concerts. Normally, I'd be preparing snacks, folding extra chairs, expecting guests. But this year, no one was coming. Not even me. I showered, dressed, and walked into the city alone. Crowds moved like rivers, loud and fast. Children ran between legs with painted faces. Vendors shouted about bocadillos and cheap cava. Street performers drummed loud rhythms that shook the windows of shops. I walked through it all like a ghost. Detached. Floating. Present in body only. And then I saw him. My nephew. He wasn't alone. A girl, maybe his age, maybe younger, stood beside him. They laughed. Not just polite laughter, real laughter, easy and effortless. Her hand briefly touched his wrist as they passed through a tight corner of the street. He didn't flinch. He didn't notice me. I stopped walking, half hidden behind a souvenir stand. My stomach dropped, not from jealousy, but from something colder. Like reality sinking in through my skin. Of course he had a life. Of course there were others. Of course what happened between us didn't tether him like it tethered me. I turned and walked away. At the edge of the Plaza Mayor, a brass band was playing. Couples danced badly. Kids threw confetti. I pushed through until I reached the north steps and sat, far enough to watch, close enough to feel the pulse of everything I didn't belong to anymore. He didn't follow me. He never even saw me. That night, I returned home well after dark. My husband wasn't there. I didn't know where he was. I didn't ask. I plugged in the flash drive. It took a minute to load. Only one folder. No password. Inside, a dozen photos. All recent. All familiar. Me in the backyard, watering the garden. Me carrying laundry down the hall. Me in the kitchen, pausing by the window. Me and my nephew, talking, laughing, standing too close. The angles were odd. Some too perfect. As if framed. Not accidental. But not hidden either. The last photo was from 2 nights ago. Us, walking into the guest house by the beach. My throat tightened. I closed the folder, yanked the drive out, and flung it across the room. It bounced once and slid under the couch. I didn't retrieve it. The next morning, he was back. My husband. He greeted me with 2 tickets in hand for the fair's final flamenco night. "Let's go together," he said. I stared at the tickets. Just us. Like before. We sat on opposite sides of the tram. He hummed the tune the street performers had played the day before. I didn't ask how much he knew, or how much he had seen. I didn't ask about the photos. I didn't ask about the girl he might have hired or the camera he might have placed. I sat beside him like nothing had happened. At the show, we clapped on rhythm. We smiled. We shared wine. To anyone looking, we were a couple reclaiming their spark. And then I saw him again. My nephew. Alone this time, standing behind the last row of chairs, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there. I turned away before my husband noticed. My heart raced so loud I was sure everyone around me heard it. After the show, he suggested dinner. I declined. I said I had a headache. I said I needed air. He offered to walk me home, but I insisted. On the way out, I looked back once. My husband wasn't watching the dancers anymore. He was watching me. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat in the kitchen with the light off, listening to the refrigerator hum and die, hum and die. I didn't notice the footsteps at first. My nephew appeared in the doorway. Silent. Pale. I saw the photos, I whispered. His jaw clenched. So did I, he said. He sat across from me. We didn't touch. We didn't move. He wants me to end it, I said. It's already ended, he replied. I didn't argue. He stood. I'm leaving. Tonight? Tomorrow morning. I nodded. He walked toward the door, paused, then turned. I meant it, he said. Meant what? That it wasn't nothing. And then he left. The next morning, I woke to an empty house. His room was cleared out. Sheets folded. Closet empty. I stood at the window, expecting to see his silhouette one last time. I didn't. But an envelope sat on the doorstep. It had no name. Just a single postcard inside. It was blank. Except for 2 words on the back. Siempre tú. I stood in the hallway holding it for what felt like hours. And then I burned it in the sink. I watched the edges of the postcard curl in the flame, the words dissolving faster than my thoughts could catch them. When the last ember dropped into the stainless steel sink, I stood motionless, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was no satisfaction. No clarity. Only silence. The kind that stretches itself across your skin and settles into your bones. By mid-morning, the weight of the emptiness became unbearable. I went to open the windows and let in the air, hoping movement would silence the noise in my head. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that made everything look like it belonged to a different time. The street was still. A few bicycles passed, a delivery truck rumbled by, but none of it registered. Inside the house, everything felt out of place. His room was spotless, as if he'd never existed. No books, no clothes, not even a loose pen or receipt. I walked in circles. I cleaned drawers that didn't need cleaning. I moved a vase, then put it back where it was. The echo of nothing filled every room. By the time my husband returned, I had been sitting in the living room for nearly an hour, unmoving, hands in my lap, trying to look composed but failing. He walked in without looking at me, dropped his keys in the bowl, and went straight to the kitchen. The clink of glass. The hiss of the gas stove. I finally spoke. He's gone. My voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. He didn't respond. He poured water into the kettle. His movements were precise, practiced. I didn't say goodbye, I added. He reached for 2 cups from the cupboard and set them on the counter. You knew, I said. His hands didn't stop. You've known for weeks. Still nothing. The kettle clicked off. He poured the water, dropped a teabag into each cup, stirred slowly. Then finally, he turned to me. Why didn't you leave with him? I froze. I thought you would. My lips parted, but no answer came. He placed a cup in front of me and sat across the table. For the first time in months, we looked each other in the eye. I couldn't read his expression. Not anger. Not sadness. Something else. Something quieter. Resignation, maybe. Or emptiness. You used to be louder, he said. It wasn't a complaint. Just an observation. I stared at the rising steam. I didn't know how. He nodded once, slowly. That's the thing, he said. Neither did I. He stood and left the cup untouched. The rest of the day passed like a blur. We didn't speak again. He retreated to his office, and I stayed in the garden. I sat under the olive tree with a book I didn't read. I watched the sky shift and didn't feel the hours moving. At dusk, I found myself wandering. Not far. Just through the neighborhood. I passed by the plaza where kids were kicking a deflated soccer ball against a wall, where an old man watered a patch of overgrown plants that hadn't bloomed in years. The ordinary comforted me in ways nothing else could. I walked into a corner cafe I hadn't visited in years. The air was warm, the smell of coffee and worn wood familiar. I ordered tea. Sat by the window. And then I saw him. Across the street. On the other sidewalk. My husband. Standing still. Alone. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a shop window. Inside was a display of silver bracelets, earrings, and pendants arranged in careful rows. He didn't move for a long time. When he did, he turned, not toward home, not toward the car, but down a side street, deeper into the old part of town. I didn't follow. Back home, the lights were off. The house felt colder. I turned on the hallway lamp and noticed something strange. On the floor, near the front door, sat a bag. Not my husband's. A different one. Familiar. It was the same travel bag my nephew had used when he first arrived. I stared at it for a full minute before reaching down to unzip it. Inside, folded clothes, a sketchbook, a half-used tube of paint, 2 movie ticket stubs, and a t-shirt of mine. My throat tightened. I turned at the sound of the key in the lock. The door opened. But it wasn't my husband. It was him. He stepped inside, eyes scanning me like he wasn't sure if I was real or not. I forgot something, he said softly. I opened my mouth. You said. I know what I said. He stepped closer. But I couldn't go. I tried. I really did. The bag still sat open between us. I thought you left, I whispered. I did. Then why come back? His voice caught in his throat. Because nothing felt real out there. I stood frozen. My heart was racing. And then the front door opened again. My husband stood in the doorway, holding a small box in one hand. He looked between us without blinking. And then, as calm as ever, he stepped forward, placed the box on the table, and said, "You left this in the car." My nephew didn't move. Neither did I. Without another word, my husband turned and left. The door closed behind him. And the silence that followed was deafening. The moment the door closed behind him, the air shifted. Not just in temperature or sound, but something deeper. Something final. Neither of us moved. He stood near the threshold, still holding the strap of his bag like he wasn't sure whether to drop it or run with it. I stood a few feet away, numb and weightless. Everything in the room felt too loud, the distant traffic outside, the soft hum of the refrigerator, even the rustle of the curtains brushing the floor. I couldn't look at him. I sat down on the edge of the couch, palms flat on my knees. My breath was shallow. I could feel my pulse in my throat. He stepped forward and gently placed the bag by the door, his movements slow, cautious, like he was approaching an injured animal. Then he walked to the chair across from me and sat. Still, silence. I knew he was waiting for me to speak. To ask him why he came back. Or to tell him to leave. But all the words I might have said were too brittle now. Every sentence would collapse under its own weight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. I didn't know he'd be here, he said quietly. I nodded once. That was all I could manage. The bag between us was still open. A shirt peeked out, one I remembered folding weeks ago, before everything fractured. Somehow that made it worse. He wasn't surprised to see me, he added. I flinched. He noticed. I thought I could stay gone, he continued. I thought that was the right thing to do. He didn't finish the thought. Outside, a dog barked. A car drove by. The neighborhood didn't care what was unraveling inside this house. I finally looked up. His face was tired in a way that went beyond sleep. He hadn't shaved. His jaw was tense. His hands trembled slightly, resting on his knees. I'm not angry, I said, surprising even myself. His head lifted. Our eyes met. Then what are you? I searched for the word. It didn't come. He stood abruptly. Walked to the window. Pulled the curtain back and stared out like there was something out there that could make this easier. There wasn't. I followed him with my eyes but didn't move. I watched the way his shoulders rose and fell. The way his fingers fidgeted with the edge of the curtain. He turned, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Do you want me to stay? I blinked. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't even desperate. It was something softer. Something real. I don't know what I want, I said honestly. He nodded, like he'd expected that. Then he stepped toward the door and picked up his bag again. I opened my mouth, but again, nothing came. He placed his hand on the doorknob and paused. His back was to me. She'll never ask, he said without turning around. I frowned. What? He looked over his shoulder, eyes heavy. Your husband. He'll never ask you what happened. Because he already knows. And knowing gives him control. Asking gives you power. I felt something twist inside me. Something I didn't want to examine too closely. He opened the door, but this time I stopped him. Wait. He turned again. You can't come back, I said. He nodded once. And then he was gone. For real this time. I stood in the center of the room, staring at the space he'd just occupied. The silence was different now. Emptier. I picked up the coffee mug on the table and moved it to the sink just to do something. Later that evening, I went for a walk. Alone. The streets were lit with the soft yellow of old lamps. Couples passed by, laughing. Dogs tugged at leashes. Life went on, loud and indifferent. I walked aimlessly, turning when I felt like it, stopping when I didn't. At some point, I found myself in front of the art gallery we'd visited together weeks ago. The one with the abstract paintings and the cracked white walls. It was closed, of course. But something in the window caught my eye. A new exhibit poster. Freshly taped. An unfamiliar name. A Spanish title I didn't recognize. But next to it, in the corner of the display, something handwritten. A note, taped behind the glass. To the woman who stood still while the house burned down. No signature. No date. I stared at the note until the streetlight above me buzzed and flickered. I walked home in silence, the words echoing in my head. When I entered the house, I smelled something. Warm. Familiar. My husband was in the kitchen. Cooking. He didn't look up when I walked in. He stirred the pot calmly, as if we did this every day. As if things hadn't fallen apart and reassembled themselves into something unrecognizable. I stood in the doorway. He placed 2 bowls on the table, poured wine, and sat down. I followed. Slowly. We ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, he finally looked at me. I made your favorite. I nodded. I know, I whispered. He sipped his wine. Then, with the same calm, he said, "Tomorrow morning, I'm leaving." My fork stopped midair. I've rented a small flat near the coast. Just for a while. I stared at him. Why? He met my gaze evenly. Because I don't want to be here when the rest of it finally breaks. I felt my heart lurch. He didn't flinch. "I'll keep paying the mortgage," he added, standing up. "The place is yours. Do what you want with it." He carried his plate to the sink, rinsed it, dried his hands, and left the room. No goodbyes. Just absence. A few minutes later, I heard the bedroom door close. I sat at the table long after the wine was gone. And then I cried. Not because of the loss, but because of how quiet it had all become.